Whether it be development hell, rights issues, or simply not a good enough script, we missed out on so many different unique horror sequels throughout the years. Sure, I'm fairly certain that most of them would have sucked, but you don't know unless you try. Hi friends, Tyler Nichols with JoBlo here, and I hope you're ready to find out about some unmade horror sequels. We all make jokes about Busta Rhymes and Halloween Resurrection, but did you know that there was actually a script that would see him return? Not only that, but we'd also see the return of Josh Hartnett's John Tate. Let's take a look at a little known film that could have been, called Halloween Retribution. Then, after Freddy vs. Jason, I think we all expected there to either be a sequel or see some other horror villains start to face off. I mean, hell, it was the most successful film in either franchise. You'd think someone would want in on that action. And wouldn't you know it, they actually tried to get the Halloween franchise to mix with Hellraiser. Let's take a look at what went wrong with Michael vs. Pinhead. Jason has been pretty much in purgatory since his reboot back in 2009. Yet there were many scripts written that tried to bring him back. We're taking a look at the one from 2015 that took things back to summer camp and gave us some gnarly kills in the process. And when I say Jason was mean here, I mean he was f***ing mean. Let's see why we never got Nick Antosca's Friday the 13th 3D. So let's take a deep dive into why we never received these films and whether they would have been worth it in the first place. We've seen various timelines of what Laurie got up to after the events in 1978. But what about her son John, played by Josh Hartnett in H2O? And I know you've been desperate to find out what Busta Rhymes' Freddy has been up to. Well, back before the David Gordon Green trilogy, and prior to Rob Zombie giving the franchise his unique flair, a continuation was planned that would follow these characters. This would have also seen the return of Sheriff Lee Brackett, as well as an introduction of another franchise first, Snow. So today on What the F*** Happened to This Unmade Horror Movie, we find out what went down with Halloween Retribution. With a dwindling box office, a sequel to Halloween Resurrection wasn't a sure thing after its release in 2002. However, with the franchise's 25th anniversary occurring in 2003, the fandom was hoping for something. Then, with the release of Freddy vs. Jason that summer, Dimension wanted to pit Michael and Pinhead against each other. Thankfully, the Akkads put a kibosh on that idea. But that didn't prevent talks from occurring for several months, with other horror icons like Leatherface and even Jason being bandied about. If you're interested in where that one would have gone, check out our video on it. After the Halloween Returns to Haddonfield convention that took place in Pasadena that year, the Akkads took many questions about a potential 9th film. Fans were lobbying for roles for Danielle Harris, Dick Warlock, and Charles Cyphers, the latter of which got some momentum. But the Akkads weren't entirely sure where to take the series, so they started meeting with various writers. Trancas International Pictures would end up hiring the British writing team of Jim Keeble and Dudi Appleton. They crafted a story that would follow characters from past films while still trying to carve out an identity of its own. Halloween Retribution would have opened up on Halloween night 1964, exactly 1 year after Michael murdered his sister Judith. Young Michael is in an almost catatonic state. We're treated to a scene between Loomis and young Michael, but we mostly follow Dr. Hill, who thinks Michael is a lost cause. As a child, Michael steals Hill's glasses. Then moving forward to October 30th, 1978, we see that Michael has fashioned the glasses into a shiv and attacks Dr. Hill. A familiar station wagon pulls up, and the scene ends. So I guess we now know how Michael escaped the sanitarium. Here the story moves 25 years into the future, and we follow everyone's favorite survivor, Freddie Harris, as he's on a tour promoting his book, Unmasking the Monster, which is hilarious because this ends up being a plot point in Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. So we'd eventually see the idea on the big screen. Freddy has embellished a ton and made it sound like he's the sole person responsible for taking down Michael. He's back to being the Freddy that we saw at the beginning of Resurrection, a showman who's just trying to sell a story. Forget whatever character development he had in that movie. During the signing, a mysterious man questions whether Freddy actually killed Michael. This person is eventually revealed to be John Tate, Laurie's son from H2O. Then, in a bit of fan catharsis, Freddy is then murdered by the Shape after the signing. It's a bit strange, as outside of family, Michael doesn't really hunt down past victims. He's not Freddy Krueger, so the fact that he's hunting down Busta Rhymes when John is still alive is a bit baffling. Though it is explained that John has been hiding out in Europe since the events of H2O, but even still, John is at Freddy's murder, just showing up shortly after. Michael could have killed him then. It also brings up the question as to why Michael targeted Freddy and not the other survivor, Sarah Moyer. I guess Sarah wasn't promoting a book about how she kicked Michael's ass. But the story sees John return to Haddonfield in order to learn more of his mother's past. While looking at the burned down Myers house, he meets Lee Brackett, former sheriff and father of OG victim Annie. Brackett reveals that various ex-Smith's Grove's employees are turning up dead, furthering his theory that Michael is still alive and killing. And this is when we get one of the more intriguing elements of the script. It's snowing in Haddonfield. As someone who grew up in Michigan and dealt with many Halloweens with snow, this still manages to be realistic while providing a new environment for the killer. And to no one's surprise, Halloween is banned in Haddonfield. So the local teenagers try and do their own Halloween party in the woods, but the snowstorm causes them to take shelter at a nearby abandoned building. And wouldn't you know it, it's the old Smith's Grove Sanitarium. I'm sure you can see where this is heading. Michael has also taken up residence there and starts murdering the teens in various ways. It makes sense to have him there as his old home is burned down. The snow would serve to both trap the teens in the sanitarium, but also prevent help from reaching them. The film gets away from some of the meta elements that were introduced in H2O and Resurrection, and don't worry, we're not getting any martial arts action in this one. Most of the teens are pretty forgettable, but we've got Leah and Noah as our teen leads. Leah is absolutely in the Laurie Strode mold, being a bit of a bookworm. One of the more interesting elements is that Leah is tasked with watching her 14-year-old mute brother, Noah. This allows for Noah to see things, but unable to communicate them with the others. So while he may see Michael Myers early, he can't warn the others. It really raises the tension. We would eventually see John and Brackett show up to save the day. Lee Brackett is one of the best parts of the entire story. He's a broken man after Michael took his daughter from him, much in the same way that Halloween 2018 saw Laurie dealing with her own PTSD from those events. We would see Brackett dealing with his own guilt. He feels that he didn't take the threat seriously enough back in 1978. There's also a great moment where Brackett puts on his old sheriff gear, claiming that it'll make him less afraid. And when he and John are in the sanitarium, they come across the murdered daughter of the current sheriff. The parallels cause Brackett to break down briefly, but he still has the strength to confront Michael. It's a wonderful scene given all that Brackett has gone through. The big finale would occur in front of Smith's Grove and on a frozen lake, where John would bury an axe into Michael's chest. The ice would break, with Michael trying to pull John down into the cold depths, but he manages to escape with help from the others. John holds on to Michael's mask as his body sinks into the abyss. This really does feel like a definitive end for the Michael Myers character. Because of this, I'd be very curious to know what the Akkads would ask for in terms of changes. But there is the interesting hint that John will take over for his uncle, with him holding tightly onto the mask with his dark eyes. So maybe the plan was to have John take the reins. It's an element that they hinted at during the end of Halloween 4, and it even shows up in another franchise with Friday the 13th Part 5. So it would have been interesting to see them follow up on it, because this isn't just some random person from Haddonfield. This is Michael's nephew, a worthy successor to the mantle of the Shape. And that's not even getting into the Cult of Thorn aspect, which we don't really know if it's in play or not. The script overall is very interesting. There are some dumb elements like the Myers house being burned down, despite the fact that we can see that it was mostly saved at the end of Resurrection. And they really didn't need to include the flashback, as it only serves to show that Michael was treated badly by the staff. We don't need to sympathize with Michael. That's something we can just infer if he starts going after these people. But the sanitarium allows for a change of scenery that hadn't really been seen in the franchise since Part 2 at the hospital. It's not exactly known why Dimension never went through with Halloween Retribution. It could have been a variety of things. Maybe they were waiting to see if a team-up a la Freddy vs. Jason would be the way to go. Or maybe they felt that the recently released Texas Chainsaw Massacre would see an entirely different change in the world of horror. Or heck, maybe it was even Josh Hartnett, whose star was continually on the rise. Whatever it was, it's too bad we weren't able to see this story on the big screen. Getting to see the redemption of both Lee Brackett and John Tate would have been very satisfying. And the ending leaves the franchise in one of the more interesting places that it's ever been in. With the Akkads moving on to Rob Zombie's remakes and then the David Gordon Green Legacy trilogy, the chances of us seeing this in movie form is practically non-existent. But with various unproduced screenplays being made into comic books, this feels like a prime candidate, as it's tense, provides great character moments, and even provides answers to questions that some fans have been wondering for years. Like, how the heck was Busta Rhymes one of the only people to survive a Halloween movie? At least we could have wrapped that one up. Whether it's Batman vs. Superman, Alien vs. Predator, or even Godzilla vs. Kong, versus films have always intrigued audiences. Our imaginations just go wild when it comes to massive characters clashing with each other. And after the massive success of Freddy vs. Jason, studios were really hoping they could replicate that result. While other combinations like Chucky and Leprechaun were discussed, there was never any forward momentum. But there was one rumor that kept popping up that intrigued horror fans everywhere. What if the lead Cenobite from Hellraiser were to throw down with Haddonfield's infamous sister killer? That's precisely what we almost got. So join us on what the f*** happened to this unmade horror movie as we dive into what could have been with Michael vs. Pinhead. With Freddy vs. Jason kicking all sorts of ass at the box office, other films immediately started popping up just like it. We finally received the long-awaited Alien vs. Predator, and the Sci-Fi Channel even got in on the action, providing us with Boa vs. Python and Puppet Master vs. Demonic Toys. But when you think of the big faces of horror, outside of Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, there's often one other figurehead, Michael Myers. But who would he face? Given that Dimension Films, who owned the rights to Myers at the time, also owned the rights to another popular horror villain, Pinhead, that seemed like the obvious choice. While the idea had been brought up in the 90s, with Pinhead himself, Doug Bradley, being very against the idea, it still had a bit more steam to it. Screenwriter Dave Parker, who would go on to make films such as The Hills Run Red and a segment in Tales of Halloween, started developing a script in the late 90s that would pit the two horror icons against each other. Yeah, you heard me right, the 90s. But that doesn't mean this wasn't Freddy vs. Jason inspired, as Parker was anticipating massive success from that long gestating project, and knew other studios would want to capitalize. I'm sure he didn't think it'd take New Line quite so long to finally get their movie done, but hey, it finally happened, and he was right. Studios wanted more. Parker's version was titled Halloween. Well then, guess we're not starting out on a strong note. Parker wanted to approach the two characters in an almost Frankenstein meets the Wolfman style, which was a bit lighter than their own individual entries. As such, Parker started to also play with the characters' mythologies. Oy vey. First up was Michael, whose origins are completely retconned. Instead of murdering his sister on Halloween night in the way that we know it, he is instead given the lamentation configuration by a mysterious homeless man. When young Michael opens it up, a demon named Samhain comes out and possesses the child. So now, possessed Mikey murders his sister, and you know how the rest goes. Everything else happens how we remember it. Then we skip to present day, and for some reason, Kirsty Cotton from the first 2 Hellraiser entries and several others are at Michael's house looking for something. Because reasons. They're able to find the puzzle box, but one of these dummies accidentally opens it and releases the Cenobites. This also signals Michael that he needs to come home. There's a bit of a struggle as the sides clash in Myers' old house, but when Michael finally shows up, Pinhead immediately recognizes him as Samhain and is on a mission to return him back to hell. You know, think Frank from Hellraiser Part 1. But Parker's pitch did not go well, and Dimension had no intentions of ever merging the 2 franchises. They even rejected yet another pitch in 2002. Now, skip ahead a year, and Dimension was absolutely down to merge the 2 franchises after seeing the great success that New Line had doing it. And they already had some old pitches to dust off. We already went over Parker's, but what about the one from screenwriters Josh Stolberg and Bobby Florsheim? You may recognize Stolberg and Florsheim as the writers behind Piranha 3D, Jigsaw, and even Spiral. But long ago, they were just TV writers with a grand idea. Halloween in Hell, Michael versus Pinhead. Their screenplay was an absolute love letter to horror films, opening on a survivors group that includes Kirsty Cotton and Jamie Lloyd from Halloween Parts 4 through 6, but also characters from Critters, Leprechaun, and even Phantasm. We even get an acknowledgement from Jamie of the Thorn Curse. And you'll be happy to know that they did intend to bring back Danielle Harris. As the meeting ends, Michael strikes, trying to kill her. Kirsty uses the lamentation configuration to block Michael's knife, but he pierces it and embeds the knife in Kirsty's chest, summoning the Cenobites. This is actually a pretty cool moment because despite Kirsty dying, which really sucks, it does make things more personal. Plus, we get the wonderful moment of Kirsty saying to Pinhead, "You never got me," just before she dies. It's truly fantastic, and even reading it, you can just feel Pinhead's contempt. He vows to get revenge on Michael for killing Kirsty. Then there's Jamie, who was wounded in the battle. She goes to the hospital for a blood transfusion because I guess she keeps a steady supply of her own blood at the hospital? Okay then. A nurse gives her the blood, but makes the grave error of putting it back into the general blood storage. This mistake causes 7 other people to be infused with Jamie's blood. Given the curse that's on Jamie's blood, Michael can sense all of these people, so he's ready to go on a rampage. After killing all but one, our final girl Betsy, she teams up with Jamie to take on Michael. In the midst of all this, they come across other lamentation configurations, 160 to be exact, and are told that they can be put together in some kind of Rubik's Cube fashion that would help seal the gate of hell forever, therefore trapping both Michael and Pinhead. We get one massive final battle where Michael kills a bunch of Cenobites and even violently removes some of Pinhead's nails. It's one of the more exciting moments of the story, and one I would have loved to have seen filmed. The big question for any of these Versus movies is always, well, who wins? Most are able to slyly get around the topic, having both characters win in their own distinct way. Save Martha! And here is no different. The writers wanted the studio to release different endings with different victors, ultimately still ending the actual film in the same way of Jamie and Betsy closing the portal to hell. So it would really have little consequence for the next film if they had chosen to go that route. But yet again, Dimension just ended up being cold on the idea and turned it down. But in the most exciting turn of events, Dimension actually approached original creators John Carpenter and Clive Barker about creating their own film. Their idea was for Carpenter to direct and Barker to write. Shockingly, both filmmakers were very intrigued by the concept, respecting each other's work, while also seeing it as an opportunity to right the wrongs that the franchises have gone down. Doug Bradley, who had previously said he wasn't interested in such a team-up, said he was totally down if Carpenter and Barker were involved. But unfortunately, Dimension Films just didn't have the patience for anything but a rush job, something that Barker and Carpenter both loathed. Not to mention the massive roadblock that came in the way of Halloween producer Mustafa Akkad. Akkad, who owned the rights to Michael, had a set of rules for the franchise, and pairing him against Pinhead went against almost every single one of them. He always wanted the Michael Myers character to remain grounded, and having him face a demon just didn't sit well with him. So he completely blocked the project from being made. Who knows what would have come of that, but with the creative team of Carpenter and Barker, I can only imagine how groundbreaking it would have been. But even still, the biggest issue when bringing these two Goliaths together is that they have nothing in common. Pinhead is a being from hell who is brought forth in order to torture his victims so that they can feel the ultimate pleasure, pain. Michael, on the other hand, is on a never-ending journey to try and kill his family members, in particular his sister Laurie Strode. So how exactly would these two behemoths even meet? Every way that's been drafted so far has been awful. While we may have never gotten Pinhead versus Michael on the big screen, that doesn't mean there won't be more opportunities. With David Gordon Green's Halloween trilogy coming to a close with Halloween Ends, the producers will be looking at what to do with the character next. And with the new Hellraiser film releasing on Hulu, we finally have a big return to that series. So the idea of these two coming together for a film isn't as far-fetched as it may have been just a few years ago. Regardless of whether we ever get it or not, I'm just grateful there was some redemption for both of these characters after some very bad entries in their respective series.
Trick or treat,
But I'm not gonna lie, I'd love to see Michael go toe-to-toe with Pinhead. One of these days.
When it comes to the modern slasher, few are as recognizable as the hockey mask-wearing, machete-wielding maniac Jason Voorhees. His main motivation has always been to chop up young adults in whatever way possible. As the series progressed, audiences were left rooting for the killer and wishing death upon the sinful victims. But I mean, come on, look at how cool this guy is. But where on earth has he been all these years? It has been far too long since we've gotten a proper Friday the 13th film. 12 years removed from the Platinum Dunes release means we are currently in the longest stretch without a Friday the 13th since the release of the original in 1980. And that's certainly not for a lack of trying. After the success of the reboot in 2009, it seemed obvious that there would be another film. Countless films were rumored, including a direct sequel to the reboot, a prequel, and even a found footage story. Today, on The Horror Movie That Almost Was, we're taking a look at the film that came closest to entering production, Nick Antosca's Friday the 13th, 3D. Even with that title, some of you may be confused, and I get it. There already is a film titled Friday the 13th Part 3D, but no, this would not have been a remake of that film. Instead, this would be a regular Friday the 13th movie with modern 3D effects. Sorry, no red and blue glasses. Another question you may be asking is, who exactly is Nick Antosca? While he's certainly no household name, especially given the fact that I don't even know how to pronounce it, he has been on the rise in Hollywood. He created the award-winning Hulu show The Act, starring Patricia Arquette and Joey King. He's even producing the new Chucky TV show with Don Mancini. So he seems pretty well equipped to give us something at least halfway decent. Now, when it comes to the Friday the 13th timeline, things can get rather confusing. Almost every film adds a new wrinkle and brings multiple continuity errors. By the time the reboot came around, those trying to keep track of all those changes exhaled a sigh of relief. Elements were taken from the first 4 Friday films and condensed into one film. So we just get to start from where we left and continue the story with those leads, right? Right? Wrong! We've got yet another reboot on our hands. At least that's the best way to describe it. The film takes place in 1988 and makes reference to Friday the 13th lore while changing details. Like in this, Jason drowns in 1966, and his mom kills 6 counselors the next year, instead of just 2. If it weren't for the new concepts being introduced, you could almost be tricked into thinking it's just another Friday sequel. One aspect of the script that I know fellow Friday fans will love is the inclusion of children at the camp. Apart from part 6, the counselors are never actually in charge of kids. Adding the kids to the story really adds a sense of urgency and tension. Unfortunately, they're only present in the first act and are shipped back to their parents at about the 40-page mark. Not to mention the fact that Jason isn't even introduced while they're still around, so you don't really fear for their safety at all. So while it's nice to see the gimmick used, it's really not used to its full potential. Speaking of story, there's not really much of one. Not that that's a problem, because it's a Friday the 13th film after all, but it often feels like the script is just relying too much on 80s nostalgia rather than actually trying to set any kind of horror up. Sure, we get a typical slasher sex scene, but it's also some of the most awkward description of sex I've ever read. The word silent is used way more often than I'd like, especially when referring to a sex scene between teens. But the horror is sporadic and logic is constantly thrown out the window. For example, the first kill we see is of the camp's owner, Duckworth. Great name, by the way. The big deal isn't that he's been killed, it's that no one notices he's gone. The counselors don't seem to notice when they return, and even the female cook, who Duckworth had just been playing strip fish with, a play on strip poker and Go Fish, doesn't ask about his whereabouts. He just disappears and no one cares. The counselors themselves really fall in well with the stereotypical characters that usually inhabit these movies. I mean, just look at these descriptions. And that's not even mentioning the fact that we have a stoner character randomly named Weezer. With stereotypical characters also comes very stereotypical dialogue. In fact, the first 10 pages of the script are just poor dialogue scenes between the counselors. It takes so long to get going that it's easy to forget that it's supposed to be a Friday the 13th movie and not some sequel to Meatballs. There's not even an opening kill, and the dialogue isn't even good. Your mom jokes? Really? The only exciting moment comes from a near drowning, but even then, it just adds some confusion to Jason's motivations, since the counselors save a kid from drowning and prove to be at least semi-responsible. But this brings us to the main point of discussion: Jason Voorhees. There's always the question of whether we're getting hillbilly mongoloid Jason or teleporting zombie Jason. Here, he's described in a similar fashion to the hulking and realistic nature of Derek Mears' Jason, at least when he first appears. But he's only seen clearly, and for the first time with his trademark hockey mask, at the 66-page mark. That's a long time to wait. And he's not even referred to as Jason until those final few pages. Instead, he's just referred to as the Killer. Combined with the weird plot structure, it's easy to forget that this is even supposed to be a Friday the 13th movie. Maybe he does this to make some of the changes to the character a little more palatable, because there are a lot of them. First, he uses Crystal Lake to heal Jason's wounds. Then, he gets stronger every time he dies. He doesn't really stalk his victims, he just goes outright for the kill. Oh right, and he just full-on sprints in this movie. Now, not all of these changes are bad, but when you make so many changes, the essence of the character almost gets lost. It's not all terrible though. One aspect that I really love about when they finally introduce Jason is the counselors hearing his massive footsteps in the woods, and looking into the dark woods thinking they see a hulking shape. It's nice that they're not treating Jason like an omnipotent ninja. Then when the kids see him for the first time clearly, and with his mask, it's all daylight and they're all there to witness it. Jason's even sprinting up a storm in this, and it makes him even scarier. He doesn't simply wait for you to be alone. It's a cool aspect and is probably the highlight of the entire script. One questionable aspect is they have little Jason wearing a Mickey Mouse mask, and it makes me wonder how the writer ever thought in a million years that Disney would license out Mickey to be in a slasher. Maybe just wishful thinking. The biggest issue with Jason is that he doesn't show up until 25 pages in. This may work for other slashers, but not a Friday film. Even if he's only hinted at, we need a heavy dose of Jason sprinkled throughout the story, and this just doesn't give us that. And even then, he's not actually seen in the flesh until 32 pages, when we finally get the first on-screen kill of the script. That's right, a Friday movie that takes a half an hour to actually show anyone murdered. And technically, it cuts away right as Jason grabs the guy, so really, it's more like 44 pages till we get an actual kill on screen. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely a Good Friday movie in here. If the film were to forego the opening 10 minutes of counselor time at the beach and start at the campfire scene where the legend of Pamela and Jason Voorhees is told, it would have been much improved. Some of the kills are fun and the character interactions can be charming at times, but the issue is often with pacing. The kills need to be more spread out, and the horror needs to permeate more of the film, rather than just the latter half. So why oh why, after getting so close to production, did the studio decide to shelf the film? Well, Exhibit A. That's right, the poor performance by Rings at the box office sent a message to studio execs that audiences didn't want a return of long dormant series. You know, despite the fact that The Ring and Friday the 13th have about as much in common with each other as applesauce and dry cement. Regardless of why, the film simply didn't end up happening. Which brings us to the most important part of why this film wasn't made, the lawsuit. If you haven't heard, Friday the 13th has been going through its fair share of legal battles. So much so that it's kind of hard to keep up at this point. Victor Miller and Sean Cunningham have been in a dispute over the rights for years, with certain rights being split between them. Miller owns Friday the 13th and the story of Pamela and drowned son Jason, but Cunningham owns the rights to the hockey mask wearing slasher post part 1. It briefly seemed to be reconciled, but then spun out of control, and we're unfortunately still no closer to seeing Jason return to screen. When it finally does happen, will younger generations even know who Jason is? Will a reboot be needed just to inform them of the hockey mask wearing exploits? Will 3D even be a thing? Either way, I can see this script resurfacing, because while it has a ton of issues, there are interesting concepts there. And most importantly, it's got Jason killing horny teens, which, when you simplify it, is really what Friday the 13th is all about.
Which of these do you wish we could have gotten? I'm partial to Friday the 13th 3D, warts and all, just because I'm so desperate to see Jason swing his machete again. And no, Sweet Revenge does not count. Sound off in the comments and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. JoBlo was created by movie fans for movie fans, and we appreciate your support.